The dining room of the Gold Coast penthouse was a portrait of autumnal perfection, the crystal wine glasses catching the amber light of the chandelier. Yet beneath the polished mahogany table, Travis's thumb traced a slow, deliberate circle against Scarlett's bare ankle, a touch too heavy, too familiar for mere family. Skylar watched the shadow of their movement reflect in the polished silver of the gravy boat, a sudden freezing realization snapping her perfect world in half. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet, devastating moments where perfect lives unravel, stay with me. There are more secrets hidden behind these closed doors, and you won't want to miss how this ends. The scent of roasted sage and expensive Pinot Noir hung heavy in the dining room of the Gold Coast penthouse. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the shimmering skyline of Chicago into streaks of gold and silver. Inside, however, the atmosphere was a masterclass in warmth and upper-class domesticity. Skylar Thomas sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her posture impeccably straight, a faint, polite smile resting on her lips. As a senior partner at Sterling and Associates, projecting control was second nature. Tonight was just another performance, the gracious hostess, the loving wife, the pillar of the extended family. At the opposite end sat her husband, Travis Rose. He was laughing, the rich, booming sound that had charmed Skylar 7 years ago in a crowded hotel lobby. He looked perfect in his tailored navy sweater, pouring more wine for Skylar's aunt. And then there was Scarlett. Scarlett Moore, Skylar's cousin. 24, wide-eyed with a mass of unruly blonde curls that cascaded over her shoulders. She sat to Travis's right, ostensibly recovering from what she claimed was a persistent stomach bug. She hadn't touched her wine all evening, sipping instead from a glass of iced, sparkling water. Skylar took a slow sip of her Pinot, her dark eyes tracking the subtle shifts in the room. It was nothing obvious. A normal observer wouldn't have noticed. But Skylar made a living out of reading the unsaid. She noticed how Travis's gaze lingered on the curve of Scarlett's neck when she turned to speak to the person beside her. She noticed the way Scarlett's breathing seemed to hitch whenever Travis's deep voice dropped a register. Then Scarlett dropped her linen napkin. "Oh, clumsy me," Scarlett murmured, ducking her head beneath the table. Travis moved almost simultaneously. "I've got it." Skylar didn't move. But from her vantage point, the reflection in the polished silver base of the floral centerpiece betrayed them. She saw Travis's large hand bypass the fallen napkin on the Persian rug. Instead, his fingers brushed against the bare skin of Scarlett's calf, resting there for a prolonged, suffocating second. A sharp electric jolt of nausea hit Skylar's stomach. The silver reflection showed Scarlett's hand coming down to cover Travis's. A secret, desperate squeeze. The air in Skylar's lungs turned to ice. She placed her wine glass down, the crystal clinking softly against the table. The sound was deafening to her own ears, yet no one else stopped talking. The laughter continued. The perfect dinner went on. 2 hours later, the guests were gone and leaving behind the quiet hum of the dishwasher and the scent of extinguished candles. Travis was in his study, supposedly answering a late-night email from his broker. Skylar walked into the guest bathroom to replace the hand towels. Her hands felt detached from her body, numb and mechanical. As she gathered the damp linens, her foot brushed against the small woven wastebasket. Sitting right on top, barely concealed beneath a crumpled tissue, was a small white plastic stick. Skylar stared at it. The bathroom lights buzzed faintly overhead. Slowly, she reached down and picked it up. 2 stark blue lines stared back at her, a positive pregnancy test. She remembered Scarlett's sudden aversion to wine, the complaints of nausea, the hidden touch beneath the table. Skylar stood in the pristine, marble-tiled bathroom for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't scream or throw the glass apothecary jars against the mirror. Instead, a terrifying, absolute stillness settled over her. The woman who had loved Travis Rose died in that sterile white room. What walked out carefully, placing the positive test back into the trash exactly as she had found it, was the senior partner of Sterling and Associates. And she had a case to build. Monday morning arrived with the unforgiving brightness of a clear Chicago sky. Skylar Thomas walked through the double glass doors of Sterling and Associates precisely at 7:30, the rhythmic click of her heels echoing against the polished marble floors. She wore a charcoal-tailored suit, her armor designed to project absolute authority. To the junior associates who scrambled out of her way in the corridor, she was the untouchable senior partner, a woman whose life was as perfectly structured as her winning closing arguments. Inside her corner office, however, the atmosphere shifted entirely. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing her off from the low hum of the bullpen, the invisible strings holding her upright seemed to snap. She did not sit in her plush leather chair. Instead, she stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring blankly at the sluggish, dark water of the Chicago River far below. It had been 36 hours since she found the plastic stick in the wastebasket. 36 hours of smiling over Sunday brunch, of making polite conversation about Scarlett's lingering flu, of sleeping beside a man who now felt like a stranger wearing her husband's skin. Skylar turned from the window and walked to her desk. She bypassed her firm-issued terminal and opened her personal laptop. Travis was a successful wealth manager, a man who prided himself on discretion, but he was fundamentally arrogant. He believed his encrypted servers and dual-factor authentication apps were impenetrable. He forgot that Skylar spent her days dismantling the elaborate financial fortresses of corrupt billionaires. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Accessing his private domain crossed a line from which there was no return. It was a breach of privacy, a betrayal of trust, and definitively fatal to whatever illusion remained of their marriage. She pressed enter. It took her 40 minutes of methodical, cold calculation to bypass the security on his secondary cloud account, utilizing a backdoor vulnerability in a shared home network router he had set up months ago. When the screen finally loaded displaying a sterile grid of folders, the silence in the office grew deafening. She ignored the tax documents and went straight to a hidden subfolder labeled simply with a single period. A cascade of emails and digital receipts flooded the screen. Skylar's eyes, trained to speed read hundreds of pages of dense legal briefs, absorbed the devastation in seconds. There were hotel confirmations from their supposed separate business trips to New York. There was a digital receipt for an 18-karat gold tennis bracelet shipped to a P.O. box she didn't recognize. But it was the email thread between Travis and an address logged simply as SM that stopped the air in her throat. I can't stop thinking about the ultrasound Travis had written 2 days ago, just hours before their Thanksgiving dinner. Seeing the heartbeat changed everything, Scar. We just have to be patient. I'm moving the assets quietly. I'll file the papers after the holidays. I promise. I hate lying to her. Scarlett's reply read timestamped 20 minutes later. She's been so good to me, but I want our family to be real. I want to hold your hand in public without hiding. Skylar stared at the glowing pixels until they blurred into sharp, stinging lines. Moving the assets quietly. The words echoed in her mind, a jarring collision of personal betrayal and professional threat. He wasn't just breaking her heart, he was attempting to dismantle her financial security. He was planning to leave her with nothing while he built a new kingdom with her own blood. A soft knock rattled the oak door. "Miss Thomas?" Her assistant's voice was muffled through the heavy wood. "The executive committee is waiting for you in conference room A." Skylar closed the laptop. The screen went black, reflecting her own pale, rigid face. She took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing the agonizing shards of her shattered life into a tight, locked box deep within her chest. She smoothed the lapels of her charcoal suit, her expression shifting from a devastated wife back to the most lethal litigator in the room. "I'll be right there," she said, her voice perfectly steady, colder than the glass against the winter wind. The neon sign of Sullivan's Diner buzzed with a rhythmic dying hum, casting intermittent red shadows across the rain-slicked pavement of the West Loop. It was a bleak, forgotten corner of the city, miles away from the gleaming glass towers of Sterling and Associates. That was precisely why Skylar had chosen it. She needed a place where the air smelled of stale grease and burnt coffee, a place where no one would recognize a senior partner in a tailored charcoal coat. She pushed open the heavy glass door, the small bell above jingling pitifully. The diner was mostly empty, save for a tired waitress wiping down the counter. In the furthest booth, half swallowed by the shadows, sat Sean Murphy. He didn't look like a man who possessed a mind capable of untangling the most complex offshore financial webs in the country. He wore a rumpled gray button-down, his tie loosened, staring into a mug of black coffee with the exhausted gaze of a man who rarely slept. Skylar approached silently and slid into the cracked vinyl seat opposite him. Sean looked up. His eyes were sharp, analytical, immediately assessing the rigid posture and the dark, bruised exhaustion beneath her perfect makeup. "Ms. Thomas," Sean said, his voice a low, gravelly murmur. He didn't offer his hand. I admit when I got on the call from an encrypted number, I expected corporate espionage, not a midnight meet at a diner. Skylar did not waste time with pleasantries. She reached into her leather tote and withdrew a sleek silver USB drive. She placed it exactly in the center of the scratched Formica table. There are over 10,000 emails and bank statements on that drive. Skylar said her voice perfectly level, betraying none of the acid burning in her throat. Encrypted servers, secondary cloud accounts. I need to know where the money is going. Sean's gaze dropped to the drive, then slowly lifted back to her face. You're a senior partner at Sterling. You have an army of analysts and auditors at your disposal. Why come to an independent contractor who charges triple their rate for absolute discretion? Because my firm is bound by ethical protocols and legal boundaries that I am currently bypassing, Skylar replied coldly. I read your file, Mr. Murphy. You found the Cayman accounts in the Harrison divorce when federal investigators missed them. You operate in the gray. Sean picked up the drive, the metal catching the red neon light from the window. He turned it over in his fingers, feeling the physical weight of whatever disaster it contained. Who is the target? Skylar looked away, her eyes fixing on a bead of rain tracing an erratic path down the glass pane. To say it aloud was to make it real. To admit it to a stranger was a different kind of death. My husband, she finally said. The words tasted like ash. Travis Rose. He is a wealth manager. He is currently funneling marital assets into hidden accounts or preparing for a quiet, unilateral exit. She did not mention Scarlett. She did not mention the positive pregnancy test resting in the guest bathroom trash, or the sickening realization that her husband was building a nursery with her cousin using her money. That was her own private, unspeakable hell. But Sean was observant. He noticed the white-knuckled grip she had on the strap of her bag, the subtle betraying tremor in her jaw. A man like that doesn't just hide money for the thrill of it, Sean noted quietly, pocketing the drive. He's building a new nest, usually means someone else is waiting to move in. Skylar's eyes snapped back to his, a sudden terrifying void of emotion in her dark irises. I don't care who is waiting for him, Skylar whispered, the temperature in the booth seeming to drop several degrees. I need you to map every shell company, every crypto wallet, every offshore trust he has touched. I need to know exactly how much he thinks he has. Sean took a slow sip of his terrible coffee. And once we find it, most wives just want their fair half. Skylar leaned forward, the red light catching the hard, unyielding planes of her face. I don't want my half, Mr. Murphy. When I am done with Travis Rose, I want him to realize that the only thing he actually owns is the suit on his back. The pastel pinks and blues of the North Shore Country Club Conservatory were designed to evoke gentle joy, but to Skylar they felt like the padded walls of a brightly lit asylum. It was mid-December, the snow outside falling in heavy silent drifts, insulating the glass-walled room in a cocoon of forced cheer. Scarlett's baby shower was an intimate affair, just 40 of their closest family and friends, sipping non-alcoholic mimosas and eating miniature goat cheese quiches to the soft soundtrack of a string quartet. Skylar stood near the elaborate dessert table, a flute of real dry champagne gripped loosely in her hand. She wore a soft cream cashmere dress, the very picture of the elegant, supportive older cousin. Every smile she offered, every polite nod to an aunt or a former sorority sister of Scarlett's required a Herculean effort that slowly drained the marrow from her bones. She's glowing, isn't she? Aunt Clara sighed, appearing at Skylar's elbow. Clara's eyes were misty as she watched her daughter across the room. Scarlett was indeed glowing. She sat in a high-backed wicker chair adorned with white winter roses unwrapping a mountain of gifts. She looked radiant, her blonde curls pinned up loosely, a delicate hand resting on the slight, barely there swell of her stomach beneath a flowing maternity dress. She is... Skylar agreed, her voice a smooth, practiced melody. She took a sip of champagne, letting the cold liquid numb the persistent ache in her throat. Just then, Travis stepped into the center of the room. He had been relegated to the husbands and fathers corner near the mahogany bar, but now he approached Scarlett holding a large, oddly shaped box wrapped in expensive silver paper. From Skylar and me, Travis announced, his rich voice projecting easily over the polite chatter. He handed the box to Scarlett, his fingers lingering on the cardboard just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Skylar felt a phantom hand close tightly around her windpipe. She hadn't bought that gift. She hadn't even known what he had chosen. Scarlett tore the paper away, her eyes widening in manufactured surprise. It was a handcrafted vintage wooden rocking horse, polished to a high sheen. Oh, Travis. Skylar, it's absolutely beautiful. Only the best for our new addition, Travis said, smiling down at her. The look that passed between them, then a fleeting, deeply intimate exchange of shared secret futures, was so loud Skylar was amazed the rest of the room didn't instantly fall silent. He wasn't looking at his cousin-in-law. He was looking at his child. He was looking at the woman carrying his legacy. Skylar's fingernails dug into her palms, creating deep half-moon crescents in her skin. The psychological torture was a living, breathing entity in the room, pressing heavily against her chest. She wanted to scream. She wanted to hurl her crystal glass at the extravagant ice sculpture and tear the silver wrapping paper to shreds. She wanted to drag Travis by his tailored lapels and force him to look at the wreckage he was creating right in front of her face. Instead, she stepped forward, joining them in the center of the room. "I'm so glad you like it, sweetie," Skylar said, resting a hand gently on Scarlett's shoulder. The younger woman flinched almost imperceptibly beneath the touch. Skylar met Travis's eyes over Scarlett's head. They were warm, oblivious, utterly devoid of guilt. He thought he had won. He thought he was managing both of his worlds perfectly. He didn't know that just hours before this shower, Skylar had been on a secure line with Sean Murphy, authorizing the quiet liquidation of their joint offshore portfolios. Under Sean's guidance, she was routing the funds into an irrevocable trust in her name, only exploiting a complex legal loophole Travis himself had designed years ago to shield his assets from potential malpractice suits. He had handed her the very weapon she was now using to bleed him dry. "Let him think he's safe," the cold, analytical voice of the forensic accountant echoed in the back of her mind. "Every day he plays house is another day we drain an account." Skylar's smile widened, sharp, brilliant, and entirely empty. "We simply can't wait to meet the baby," she said softly. The blue light of the dual monitors cast a sterile, icy glow across the mahogany desk in the home study. It was 2:14 in the morning. Outside, a bitter Chicago wind howled against the reinforced glass, but inside, the only sound was the rapid, rhythmic clicking of Skylar's mechanical keyboard. "The primary Cayman holding is zeroed out." Sean Murphy's voice rasped through Skylar's encrypted earpiece. Even through the digital compression, he sounded exhausted. "We are moving to the domestic brokerage accounts now. This is the delicate part, Skylar. If he has active alerts set up for withdrawals over 50,000, his phone is going to light up like a Christmas tree." Skylar stared at the complex web of routing numbers and corporate entities displayed on her left monitor. "He doesn't," she replied, her voice an emotionless whisper in the dark room. "He disabled the push notifications last month because he's been quietly funneling cash to a private escrow account. He didn't want the alerts popping up while I was looking at his phone. It was a brilliant, fatal mistake born of pure arrogance." Travis believed he was the architect of their financial universe. He had spent years setting up intricate, nested shell companies to minimize their tax burden, structuring them so that either spouse had unilateral authority to move assets in an emergency. He had built a loaded gun and handed her the grip. "All right," Sean said, initiating the transfer to the irrevocable trust. "You have 72 hours before the ghost balance on his user interface catches up with the actual ledger. Until then, he'll log in and see exactly what he expects to see. Do it." As Skylar watched the progress bar inch across the screen, a sudden sharp creak of a floorboard echoed from the hallway. Adrenaline, cold and sharp as cracked ice, flooded Skylar's veins. Her hand flew to the keyboard, hitting the macro shortcut she had programmed earlier. Instantly, the intricate financial maps vanished, replaced by a dense 400-page PDF of a corporate deposition regarding a pharmaceutical merger. The heavy oak door pushed open. Travis stood in the doorway, the hallway light casting a long shadow into the dark study. He was wearing the charcoal silk pajama pants she had bought him for their 5th anniversary. He rubbed a hand over his sleep-tousled hair, looking the very picture of a handsome, drowsy husband. "Sky," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "It's past 2. What are you doing?" Skylar didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the dense legal text, her face illuminated by the white screen. "Just finishing the prep for the Peterson merger. The senior partners want a vulnerability assessment on my desk by 8. Travis sighed softly, walking up behind her. He placed his large, warm hands on her shoulders, his thumbs pressing into the tense muscles at the base of her neck. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, a touch that used to make her lean back and close her eyes. Now it took every ounce of her willpower not to shudder in absolute disgust. "You work too hard," he said softly, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. "I was actually thinking, maybe we should sit down and look at our joint liquid portfolio tomorrow night. I'm considering shifting some capital into a new residential real estate venture." Skylar's heart slammed against her ribs. A residential real estate venture. A house, a nursery, a new life funded by the money she had bled for over the last decade. She turned her head slightly, offering him a tired, entirely manufactured smile. "That sounds like a smart move. Let's look at it after the weekend, though. I'm going to be buried in this merger until Friday." "Okay," Travis agreed easily, patting her shoulder. "Don't stay up too late. The bed is cold without you." He turned and padded softly back out of the room, pulling the door shut behind him. Skylar sat frozen for a long moment, listening until the sound of his footsteps faded entirely into the master bedroom. Slowly, she hit the shortcut key. The deposition vanished and the financial transfer screen reappeared. "Sean," she whispered. "I heard," the accountant replied quietly. "The transfer is complete, Skylar. The trust is locked." Skylar looked at the final balance on the screen. It was an astronomical number now sitting safely behind an impenetrable legal firewall bearing only her name. She leaned back in her leather chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting in her dark, tearless eyes. Travis Rose, the high-flying wealth manager of the Gold Coast, was officially ruined. He just didn't know it yet. The private dining alcove at Alinea was a masterclass in sensory manipulation bathed in the soft, warm glow of recessed amber lighting. Outside, the brutal Chicago winter whipped through Lincoln Park, but inside the air tasted of white truffles and aged burgundy. It was their 7th wedding anniversary. Travis sat across the small, intimate table, looking devastatingly handsome in a bespoke charcoal suit. He raised his crystal goblet, the dark red wine catching the candlelight. 7 years, Travis murmured, his voice dropping into that familiar, intimate register that had once made Skylar's heart stutter. His eyes, crinkling at the corners, held a masterfully constructed expression of profound devotion. "And you are more beautiful tonight than the day I met you in that crowded lobby. To us, Skylar. To the life we've built, and to everything that comes next." Skylar picked up her own glass. Her hand was perfectly steady. The diamond on her ring finger flashed a cold, sharp light. "To everything that comes next." She echoed her tone, smooth, melodic, and entirely empty of a soul. She touched the rim of her glass to his. The crystal chimed a high, clear note of finality. She took a sip, the complex notes of the burgundy turning to ash on her tongue. Travis reached across the white linen tablecloth, his large hand covering hers. His palm was warm. It took an agonizing physical effort of will for Skylar not to flinch, not to pull her hand away and wipe her skin on the napkin. Instead, she softened her eyes, tilting her head in a pantomime of affection. "I have something for you." Travis said, his smile widening. He withdrew a long, flat velvet box from his breast pocket and slid it across the table. Skylar stared at it. A guilt gift. It was a classic move, textbook behavior for a man whose conscience was desperately trying to balance the scales of his own deceit. He was planning to leave her for her pregnant cousin, but tonight he would buy her diamonds to prove to himself that he wasn't a monster. She opened the box. Resting on the black satin was a delicate platinum necklace, set with a stunning tear-shaped sapphire surrounded by a halo of crushed diamonds. "Travis?" she breathed, infusing her voice with just the right amount of breathless awe. It's staggering." "Oh, let me put it on you," he insisted, already rising from his chair. He stepped behind her. Skylar closed her eyes, feeling the brush of his fingertips against her nape as he fastened the clasp. The metal of the necklace was shockingly cold against her collarbone, a heavy, icy chain. "Perfect," he whispered, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss to the curve of her neck. In her mind, Skylar saw the digital ledger from Sean Murphy's encrypted drive. She saw the zeroed-out balances, the dissolved shell companies, the irreversible transfer of every cent Travis had ever earned into a trust he could never touch. She felt the cold sapphire against her skin and realized it was purchased with a credit card that in exactly 48 hours would be declined. Thank you, Schuyler said softly, turning her head to meet his gaze. He smiled down at her, a man completely at ease, entirely secure in his kingdom. He thought he was playing a brilliant game of chess, managing his successful, high-powered wife and his young pregnant mistress with effortless grace. He had no idea he was already a ghost, sitting at a table paid for by money he no longer possessed, married to a woman who had already attended his funeral. The waiter appeared seamlessly, replacing their plates for the next course. Schuyler picked up her silver fork, her appetite suddenly viciously returning. The calm before the storm was a suffocating thing, but as she looked at her husband, Schuyler finally felt at peace. The execution was set. The 64th floor of Sterling and Associates was notoriously quiet, insulated by thick acoustic paneling and the unspoken rule that panic was for lower tax brackets. Schuyler Thomas sat behind her expansive glass desk, the Chicago skyline stretching out behind her like a conquered territory. Her hands rested flat on the cool surface, perfectly still. At precisely 2 o'clock, the heavy oak door swung open. Travis strolled in wearing his signature confident smile and a tailored charcoal topcoat over his suit. He looked perfectly at ease in the epicenter of corporate warfare, entirely unaware that he was the casualty. "Hey, monsieur," he said, his voice warm, filling the silent room. He moved to lean across the desk to kiss her cheek, but Schuyler subtly leaned back, interlacing her fingers. "Your assistant was very mysterious. Said you needed my signature on a sudden escrow release." "Sit down, Travis," Schuyler said. The temperature of her voice, completely devoid of its usual melodic warmth, made him pause. The smile faltered at the edges of his mouth, but he recovered quickly, taking the leather guest chair opposite her. "Is everything all right? You look exhausted." Schuyler did not blink. She reached out and placed a single thick manila folder in the exact center of the glass desk. She pressed her manicured index finger against the cardboard, sliding it smoothly across the surface until it stopped inches from his hands. "Open it." Travis frowned at a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his handsome features. He picked up the folder and flipped it open. The first page was printed on heavy watermarked legal stock. Petition for dissolution of marriage. He stared at the bold black letters. He read them again. A slow, uncertain laugh escaped his throat. "Sky, what is this? Is this a joke?" "Turn the page," she instructed, her tone clinical, as if directing a junior associate through a mundane deposition. Travis swallowed hard, his thumb pulling back the heavy paper. The subsequent pages were not standard divorce forms. They were highly detailed forensic accounting ledgers, the Cayman Islands Shell Company, the domestic joint brokerage accounts, the decentralized crypto wallets he had set up under a pseudonym. Every single line item ended in the same devastating number, $0. Below the ledgers were the transfer confirmations authorized by his own legally binding proxy, moving every cent of their liquid marital assets and the funds he had secretly diverted into an irrevocable trust solely in Schuyler's name. The silence in the office grew heavy, suffocating. Travis's face drained of color, turning a sickly ashen gray. He reached into his coat pocket with a trembling hand, pulling out his phone. He frantically tapped his screen, opening his primary banking application. Schuyler watched the exact moment his digital world collapsed. The red error message reflected faintly in his wide, terrified eyes. Access denied. Account frozen. "You forgot what I do for a living, Travis," Schuyler said softly. The quietness of her voice was far more terrifying than any scream could have been. "You forgot that I dismantle men much smarter than you before my morning coffee." "Schuyler, He choked on the words, his lungs seemingly unable to draw air. He looked up at her, the mask of the perfect, charming husband completely shattered, leaving behind a panicked, cornered animal. "The money. It's gone. Everything is gone." "I know about the baby," Schuyler stated, the words dropping like stones into a bottomless well. "I've known since Thanksgiving. I know about the nursery you're building. I know about the tennis bracelet. I know about the promises you made to Scarlett in that bed while I was working to fund your lifestyle." Travis opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The absolute terror of his reality was setting in. He had planned a soft, cushioned exit. He had planned to leave her the house while he took the millions he had siphoned away to start a new idyllic family. Now he was looking down the barrel of total bankruptcy. "You are going to take your coat," Schuyler continued, her posture rigid, her eyes black and unyielding. You are going to leave the keys to my penthouse, my cars, and the secure access fob to this building on this desk. You will not return to the apartment. Your personal belongings have already been boxed and sent to a storage unit in Scarlett's name. You can't do this, he finally whispered, his voice cracking a pathetic, desperate sound. The courts. The law. Skylar tilted her head a fraction of an inch. I am the law in this city, Travis, and you freely gave me the legal authority to move those assets. By the time your lawyers untangle the corporate loopholes you built, your child will be in middle school, and you will be broke. She picked up a sleek silver Mont Blanc pen and set it beside the folder. Sign the papers, Travis, and get out of my office. The biting wind off Lake Michigan whipped across the terrace of the Gold Coast penthouse, carrying the distant, muted roar of nighttime traffic on Lakeshore Drive. It was early March, the brutal Chicago winter slowly conceding to a hesitant spring, yet the air retained a sharp, stinging edge. Skylar Thomas stood near the glass railing, her hands wrapped loosely around a steaming mug of black tea. She wore a simple cashmere wrap over her silk pajamas, entirely stripped of the tailored charcoal armor she wore to the firm. The penthouse behind her was perfectly, immaculately silent. It was a pristine, magazine-worthy emptiness. The lingering scent of roasted sage and expensive Pinot Noir from that fateful Thanksgiving dinner was long gone, replaced by the sterile, crisp aroma of eucalyptus diffusers. Travis's leather armchairs had been removed from the study. His imported espresso machine was gone from the marble kitchen counter. The space was entirely, unequivocally hers. Sean Murphy had sent the final confirmation email 3 days ago. The dissolution of the marriage was absolute. Travis, stripped of his hidden assets and drowning in the retainer fees required to even attempt untangling the airtight trusts Skylar had established, had quietly surrendered. The last Skylar heard through the sterile, detached channels of their respective attorneys, he and Scarlett had rented a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a deeply unfashionable, distant suburb. The grand romantic fantasy of their secret affair had fractured almost instantly under the immense, suffocating weight of financial ruin. Without the lavish dinners, the weekend hotel escapes, and the promise of a multi-million-dollar safety net, the reality of their betrayal had set in. There would be no bespoke wooden rocking horses. There would be no more country club baby showers. They were left with nothing but each other and the bitter resentment of a life they had stolen but could not afford to keep. Skylar took a slow sip of her tea. The ceramic was warm against her palms, a stark contrast to the hollow chill that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in her chest. She had won. By every metric of power, wealth, and legal maneuvering, she had executed a flawless, devastating victory. She had protected her life's work, retained her formidable social standing, and excised a parasite from her home before he could bleed her dry. Her colleagues at Sterling and Associates now whispered her name in the hallways with a new fearful reverence. She was untouchable. Yet as she looked out over the glittering grid of the city, a million amber windows hiding a million private lives, she felt the heavy, undeniable price of her survival. The woman who had genuinely smiled at that dinner table, the woman who had believed in the sanctity of her vows and the inherent goodness of her own bloodline, was gone. Travis and Scarlett had destroyed her, and Sean Murphy had simply provided the legal shovel to bury her. In her place stood someone far more formidable, but terribly cold. To survive the ultimate betrayal, Skylar had been forced to match their deceit with a ruthless, calculated cruelty of her own. She had built a brilliant, impenetrable fortress of ice to protect her future, but in doing so she had frozen a vital part of her own humanity. A sudden gust of wind scattered a few stray droplets of rain against the glass sliding door. Skylar did not shiver. She had grown deeply accustomed to the cold. She turned her back on the sprawling, indifferent city and stepped inside the vast, silent penthouse, sliding the heavy glass door shut and locking it securely behind her.